Okay, so here we are for another week. It's just a little bit after 7. We're going to be doing hypertension tonight. We may have a guest come in and give a little talk. Our med student, Lisa Chick, this afternoon gave a good presentation, and I'd like to have her share it if she's available. I thought she might be able to come tonight. We'll see. But if not, perhaps next week. And it looks like there's one new face that I'm unfamiliar with, and that would be Enda, I believe. And maybe is there another one? There's a phone. And Lynn, you look familiar. I don't know if you've been in the classes before. Welcome. So I guess as far as starting out the meetings, it would be nice to hear how you found out about the meetings and what your thoughts are. So Enda here, it says, I've been to the Sunday class, but not the Tuesday night. Okay, well, welcome, Enda, and glad to have you. And anybody else care to either unmute and say hello or send a note in the chat? Works also.
I might as well say hello. I've come about 3 years ago. I came fairly regularly for about a year, and then I did it really seriously for a while, dropped some weight, got really healthy, felt great. Then I kind of slid. And just Wednesday, I was rafting the Flathead River and Glacier, and I thought it was just indigestion, but I ended up getting life flighted out. I had a MI RCA stent, and I was very, very lucky.
Wow.
Minimal damage, good ejection fraction, but um obviously it took a while to get. I've just been home a day or two, mostly sleeping, but I'm back on the I'm back on the whole food plant train. With a vengeance. Yeah.
Well, you have a pretty good reason, it sounds like, having gone through that experience. That was probably pretty frightening for you.
No, I was looking, even once I got to the emergency room, I looked at the cardiologist and like the 15 guys behind him. He said, "You're having a heart attack." And I said, "I'm having to trust you guys. I feel absolutely fine." So he brought over the rhythm strip.
Uh-huh.
And he was very sweet. He said, "You have an absolute right to refuse the angiogram, but if you do, I think you'll die." So
Well,
I
it's
said,
it's
okay.
it's pretty common for women to have more silent MIs, we call them, or just atypical presentations. So he was very right to go off what the EKG showed. It's a good
There
decision to get that done.
there was a freaking cardiologist on my raft trip.
Really?
Oh my
And
gosh.
that's the reason that I got lucky and got life flighted out, because I thought, I'll be okay in a bit. I want to keep rafting. And he found a thready pulse and other signs that told him to tell the guide to get a life flight. So I was very lucky.
It sounds like it. Well, welcome back to the classes. And maybe you'll be able to share your story with others who, give them a little motivation to stay on track, because welcome to the human race. It's not always easy to continue on healthy lifestyle habits. And anyway, we wish you the best on your continuing journey here, and welcome. Anybody else? It's kind of hard to top that story. But I'm going to look around the gallery and see who's made it in here so far. Anybody have any questions or thoughts or anything that's gone well or they're having any problems with? before we get started on high blood pressure tonight?
I have a question.
Yes, Marcia.
A couple ladies in my little town have said their legs have given out. They're walking along and their leg gives out. And I'm just wondering, is there a cause for that or what?
You mean like they have weakness and their legs?
Well, I think a weakness, or maybe they're climbing the stairs and their leg gives out. I don't really know where they're walking, but they just said the leg gives out.
Hmm.
And I've never experienced that, so.
It's not a common complaint in my experience working in the emergency department for 30 years, that my leg just gave out and I wound up injuring my hip or knees or whatever, knocked myself out. People do have syncopal episodes where they kind of pass out intermittently. But I don't have an answer for that. Scott,
Okay, I was just curious if you knew, if I don't know. I mean, I thought that was kind of strange, but 3 people have said that their leg is given out, and I thought, wow. Ugh.
Guess I would be thinking of if they didn't lose consciousness or feel dizzy to have a fainting episode like Charlie's describing, I would go to the knees. You know, if they've have knee pain or bad knees, then they could be buckling on them and from pain or whatever. But yeah, it would warrant a visit to their medical provider to discuss.
Yeah, well, that's what I said. They should go to their doctor, but you know.
well, that's interesting. We'll keep thinking about that one and see if there's someone else, if we come across something in our reading that will add more light. And Beth says, I have a slight leg length discrepancy due to scoliosis, and perhaps that could contribute a little bit to one leg going out, I guess. That's a possibility, but it's not all that common. Let me make sure I got everything out of the chat. Okay. So,
Dr. Ross, I wanted to share with you that I think that the people who live with lifestyle providers in their area are very blessed, because I've been to the GI doctor lately, and when I suggested that I was going to do a diet change and talked about lifestyle medicine, the doctor said, you don't want to do that. Go down to our nutrition unit and they'll set you up with a Mediterranean diet, and that's the very best one. So about 2 months later, I was with the cardiologist and I said, I have drastically changed my lifestyle and I'm eating whole food, plant-based. And he said, oh, that won't work for you. You don't want to be a vegetarian because you need meat to balance your diet. So those of you that don't get that kind of help from your medical providers are very lucky.
yeah, so thanks for those comments. And I think many of you have come to the understanding that you're not going to be supported by the majority of the people in the medical profession. However, the medical profession is changing. It's a gradual change. The compromise is the Mediterranean diet, and that is really being promoted, which is a whole lot better than the standard American diet. But not nearly as healthy as doing just whole plant foods. And yet it's going to take maybe another 20 or 30 years for the doctors to come around, just like they did with smoking, that smoking is not really beneficial to your health. Many doctors smoked back in the 50s and 60s, even 70s, thought it might help reduce and reduce stress and relax their patients, and they weren't willing to give up smoking. And so it's taken many years for them finally to concede that smoking is not healthy. And I think the same thing is happening with food. It's a gradual process, and we just need to keep our focus and sharing with others what our benefits have been, and eventually the science will catch up. Doug.
I just want to say that I had the office experience with my Southern California primary care. She put me on statin and tried me on several ones, and I seem to have problems. And I go off, I feel better. And I told her I was going to go on whole food plant based, and she was excited for me.
She was. Great. So yeah, there is a change. You will intermittently find people, and more so than even 2 or 3 years ago. So thanks for that information. And anybody else have anything else they care to share?
Once we have
Marcia.
topped out our, oh, go ahead.
Marcia?
Yeah, I've been telling my doctor, and if I can't see her or another one, that I'm doing it, and they go, "Good for you. That's good." So they are encouraging that way.
All right, that's great. Scott?
I was just going to say, once we feel like we're at kind of our maximum people before we kind of get rolling, so we don't forget to mention, we're going to change the Zoom link for next week going forward.
So if you have this Zoom link somewhere in your special place and you just keep clicking on it, next week it's going to be different. So watch for the weekly newsletter. The reason it's going to be different is I've been using the Western University Health Sciences, the medical school Zoom, and I'm not going to be employed there after June 30th. And so I had to get a personal Zoom, and so the numbers are different, and that's the reason. We didn't want to make your life more complicated. But if for some reason it asks you for a password, which I don't think it will, the password is 1, the number 1. I tried to make it as easy as I possibly could. So you'll punch on the link that Scott sent you, or that's on the sites. And again, if there is any request for a password, just think about the number 1. Got it?
Yeah, and I'll show everybody where the different places have the link to the Zoom. So I can go to, let's see here. You can see my
Yeah, we can see the screen.
okay. So let's go to, here it is. This is this week's newsletter. So there's the email for this week. And so here's the live class information. So here's where the current Zoom link is. I'll paste in the new one right here. So that's one place you can get it, just from being in the class newsletter. Another place you can get it, or a couple places on the class website, livelifestylemedicine.com. One is right here. So I'm just gonna put Live Lifestyle Medicine. It's the kind of what's been the flyer, the class flyer, and it has the Zoom link here. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have this be the link. So when you click this, that'll take you right to the class or to the Zoom link. And then the other place you can always get it is through the class, is in the schedule. So at the bottom of the homepage, it's always got the class schedule. So if you clicked on today's class, there's the link right there as well. So I'll have the new one there. So those are all the different places you can just click on the Zoom class link. So wanted to share that with you all.
Okay. So we're going to go ahead and get, obviously the ones, those of you who have shown up have some interest in high blood pressure, I suspect, or maybe you just have an interest in listening in. That's fine too. So I'm going to share my screen, optimize the video and the sound, share everything. So I hope you can actually see what's going on. I'm going to clip on my hard drive, and I'm going to find the part of that hard drive that has my files on it on the backup. We're going to these classes and going to class number, I think it's 9. And it happens to be explanation of hypertension. So let's start with that. It's a short video to kind of get you warmed up watching a heart. You could pretend it's your heart, but it is a heart that's beating away. So let's have some fun with that, and then we'll get to the next video.
Blood pressure is equal to the cardiac output, the volume of blood pumped out of the heart per minute, multiplied by the arteriolar resistance. Blood flow depends on the rate of heartbeats and the volume of blood pumped out with each beat. If rate or volume increases, blood pressure goes up. Likewise, increased resistance raises blood pressure, as when arteries downstream from the heart constrict. Over time, high blood pressure or hypertension damages many organs. First, the heart works harder to pump out more blood or against higher resistance. The heart then requires more oxygen and is more susceptible to angina or a heart attack. Second, arteries and arterioles can be damaged. Arterial sclerosis results when blood moves through the vessels at high pressure, damaging the protective cells lining the vessel. White blood cells are drawn to the damaged area and form plaque. Third, kidneys can be damaged. The capillaries of the kidney are delicate. Continually subjected to high blood pressure, they break down, becoming permeable to proteins and other molecules. The kidney's tubules can become clogged, decreasing the kidney's ability to make urine. Also, the proteins injure the capillaries' membranes, causing more damage and worsening the situation. Fourth, the retina of the eye can be injured if its delicate capillaries are damaged. Localized hemorrhages can occur, causing scarring and formation of new, more fragile capillaries to replace the old ones. Finally, the blood vessels of the brain can be injured. High blood pressure can cause clots to break off from atherosclerotic plaques, blocking blood flow to the rest of the brain. This is called a thrombotic stroke. Continual exposure to high blood pressure may also cause a blood vessel to burst, leading to a hemorrhagic stroke.
Okay, that's a quick introduction to some of the complications that one may get. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. One may get if you allow high blood pressure to persist. And so you don't want to ignore hypertension. And again, I just want to quickly review. What are the organ systems that may be involved? They went over first, the heart. You know, as it's trying to pump against increased resistance, or it has too much volume, or the heart rate is too rapid. Those are issues that can lead to overstretching or enlarging of the heart, which can lead to heart failure. That means the pump is not pumping effectively. You just don't want to develop heart failure. It shortens your life expectancy, and you want to have a pump that works normally. The other thing you can do is long-standing high blood pressure can affect your kidneys. So you spill protein in your urine and you can't make adequate urine and you wind up on dialysis. None of us want to wind up on dialysis. The eyes. You notice that there was some bleeding and hemorrhages and some other changes, narrowing of the arteries. You know, the main complication, I want to be able to see. And I imagine you two do too. So you don't want the complications of decreased vision associated with long-standing hypertension. Other things that happen, the brain. What happens in the brain? When you have this increased resistance, your blood vessels get stiff. So they get stiff not only can you get a heart attack because of the stiffening of the vessels and the laying down of plaque because of the inflammation and damage that's occurring over time. So you can not only does it affect the heart, but it can affect the brain, a brain attack. And there are two kinds of brain attacks. One of them is where you just get those clotting of vessels that decrease blood flow to an area, and the other is where the vessels actually break. It's called a hemorrhagic stroke. And so none of us want to have bleeding in our brain, I wouldn't imagine. And so this goes on, but it doesn't just stop with that. It goes on to dementia. It's one of the significant risk factors for developing dementia. None of us want to develop dementia, be living in bodies that we don't, remember what's going on and have to be cared for by others. It's not a life that most of us would likely choose, and probably one of the reasons that we're in the room here together. So let's figure out ways that we don't have to have hypertension, because it just may be a choice. So with that said, we're going to share the screen again. Now, there's a question. Is it worse to have elevated diastolic or elevated systolic, or does it matter? And so, medicine has kind of gone back and forth about this. Some years they place more emphasis on systolic, other times more on diastolic. Bottom line is you don't want either one. You want normal blood pressure, and I wouldn't focus on whether one is better than the other. I would work toward getting both under control. Alice, do you have anything suggestion about that?
I was going to just chime in also that the latest is more with systolic, the top number. The diastolic is more important for people that have had a valvular heart disease, that have had heart valve replacements and have known valvular heart disease. Then diastolic becomes very important as well. But it has gone back and forth. But that was the latest cardiology update I learned about, was the valvular heart disease.
Thanks, Scott. Alice, you have any input? What's worse? Go ahead and unmute yourself first.
I just got on, so I sort of didn't hear the
So the question is, what's more significant, systolic high blood pressure, or diastolic hypertension?
Well,
which do you worry most about?
both. The way I missed what you said, but here's my take on it. It's like a wave, and the systolic, that top number, is the wave, the water, like a ocean wave hitting the vessels. And so it's pow. And the bottom number is when the wave pulls back. And it also reflects the ability of the artery to relax. So when the bottom number starts going up, it means that the vessels are less elastic and they're not as able to relax. So that's important, I think. And as we get older, the vessels get stiffer and they can't relax as much. And I do think things like meditation, not medication, well, medication too, but meditation really help with that relaxation part of it. So that's my take on it. I they're both important, but for different reasons. I think the systolic, is probably is more, it fluctuates more, and that diastolic reflects like how healthy your vessels are, how stiff they're getting. So
I think that is a good answer, and I hope that answers your question. Go ahead, Marcia.
Why do they sometimes have you put when they take your blood pressure, have you put your arm up across your chest?
to get rid of gravity, to keep it at the level of the heart.
Ah, okay.
All right. Scott and Jenny.
I have a question about the bursted blood vessel in the eye. Is that the same as when you have like the bleeding like on your sclera part of your eye? Is that the same? Like,
No,
could that be caused from high blood pressure?
generally not. Generally, the bleeding, it's called a subconjunctival hemorrhage that, it looks bad, but it's usually from just minor trauma. It's sort of like you bump your arm and you get a bruise. If you cough or sneeze, sometimes you can get a very tiny blood vessel that breaks in the eye, but generally it's not, in my experience, commonly associated with just general high blood pressure. And it clears over a couple week period of time. So don't be frightened by subconjunctival hemorrhage if that's what your doctor has diagnosed for you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. They mentioned it in that video, so I just wanted to make sure, but that was behind the retina, I think. So I
Yeah,
wanted to
now
make sure it was
behind in
different.
the retina, that's different. Okay, good. Lynn.
Well, I was I was wondering if high blood pressure can help contribute to macular degeneration.
So I'm not sure if it specifically contributes to macular degeneration, but it sure can lead to blindness through broken blood vessels and whatever the exudates that are developing. I don't know, Scott or Alice, do you know about macular degeneration
I have
specifically?
no idea where it's at. And I
Whether
did
Yeah,
not see the dog.
I wouldn't know either. That specific.
I
Oh.
think it may be my diabetes. I was diagnosed with stage 1 and I'm taking the Arids. I was taking the Arids 2 fingers to try to slow that. It's a vitamin to try to slow that down. But I think it's maybe it's the diabetes more than the hypertension.
Yeah, I would probably guess that. Okay. All right, let's go back to the share and get on to the next video. And, we'll stop intermittently. This is by Neil Barnard. I love this man. I always love listening to him. I've been listening to him for almost 12 years now. And he's just calm and he's an educated guy. And I just love the way he talks. And I wish I could be like him. Here's his take on hypertension.
Hi, today we're going to talk about a healthy blood pressure, and that is so important because if your blood pressure is too high, your heart takes a pounding. It's hard on your kidneys. It's hard on all of your body. So how do you have a healthy blood pressure, and what does it mean? Well, hypertension means too much pressure in the arteries, and it's usually reported as two numbers like 120/80. Well, that first number, the 120, that's called systolic blood pressure, and that means the pressure that is in your arteries during a heartbeat. The second number, that 80, that's called diastolic, and that's the pressure between the beats when your heart is relaxing. So your blood pressure goes up to 120, down to 80, up to 120, down to 80 with each beat of the heart. Make sense? Now, an ideal blood pressure is anything below about 120/80. How do I get there? Well, if your blood pressure is too high, the first step that your doctor probably told you about was to reduce salt, sodium. And doing that's a good idea. If you get down to 2 grams of sodium per day, or 1.5 grams, which some of them are now saying, well, that will reduce your blood pressure a little bit. Now, that's not much salt. That's less than a teaspoon per day. Many people, though, are a little bit disappointed. They lower their salt intake and their blood pressure doesn't fall very far. So go a little bit further. If you pump up the vegetables and fruits, they don't have much sodium. They have a lot of potassium, and potassium helps lower your blood pressure. So lower salt, high vegetables and fruits. But fatty foods play a part here too. And it seems like we've been talking about fatty foods for so many things. Well, when people get away from fat, their blood pressure falls. How can that be? When I was a kid growing up, my mother used to cook bacon for her 5 kids. She would take the hot bacon strips out of the pan, and she'd put them on a paper towel to drain, and then she would take that hot pan filled with grease and pour it into a jar to save the bacon grease. But you know, she didn't put that jar in the refrigerator. She just put it on the shelf because she knew that as that bacon grease cools down, what happens? It turns into a solid fat, and you don't need to refrigerate that. Well, in your body, that solid fat does something to the viscosity of your blood, the thickness of your blood. What I mean is, if you're eating a lot of animal fat, and I measure your blood, a blood sample, it's actually more viscous, more thick, more like oil, less like water than it ought to be. If, on the other hand, you get the meat and cheese and fatty foods out of your diet, what happens? Your blood viscosity improves. Your blood flows more like water, less like grease. That's good for a lot of things. Athletes say, you know, this gives me more energy, but a person with high blood pressure says, you know, my blood pressure is coming down. So get away from the fatty foods. Your blood viscosity, your blood thickness drops a little bit. That's good. Weight loss helps. That's obvious. If you're not carrying around so much weight, it's pretty easy to get the blood to flow through your body without a lot of pressure, and exercise helps too. Now let me zero in for just a minute on a study called the DASH study. This was the Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension study, DASH. And in the first part of the study, they compared a control group, people following their normal diet, to a group they called the fruits and vegetables group. They asked them to eat a lot of fruits and vegetables. So look at the numbers. The group that was asked to eat more fruits and vegetables really did. A lot more fruits, more vegetables, and not much in the way of other changes in their diet. But if we looked at what happened, because they were eating a lot of fruits and vegetables, their systolic blood pressure dropped by a good 7 points, and their diastolic pressure almost 3 points. So the lesson here is bringing in those fruits and vegetables is good. But then they went a step further, and they asked a third group to follow something they called the DASH diet. And it had a lot of fruits and a lot of vegetables, but it also cut back on the meat. You see that down there? And the oils were reduced as well. And when you put that together, what happened? Well, their systolic blood pressure was cut by a good 11 points, and their diastolic pressure was cut by about 5 points. So what this shows us is that boosting the vegetables and fruits, that's good. That's about half the power of the DASH diet. But reducing the fatty foods, the meats, the oils, that's the other half. You put that together, you've got a good recipe. So let's review. To reduce our blood pressure, we want to reduce sodium. That means cut back on salt. And you can increase potassium simply by bringing the vegetables and fruits into our diet. And if you reduce the bad fats, get away from animal fats, keep all oils really low, that has a really good effect on our blood viscosity. Weight loss is good. Exercise is good, and you put it all together, you can have a healthy blood pressure. Thanks a lot.
Okay. So let me stop for a moment. I see there's one comment in the chat. I don't know if that needs to be answered or if anybody has something that they want to share. Okay. Next.
I went in for a reading today,
Yes,
um, and my blood pressure, and I'm always pretty animated, and my blood pressure was 122/67. And I think that's an attribute to a whole food plant-based diet. I get enough sleep, I meditate, I exercise, so I know the importance of all these things, so I do it. But you says it's important to rest for a period of time before you try for a reading. I don't know. I didn't rest and I was low.
Yeah, you shouldn't have to rest. And okay, you shouldn't have to rest. And kudos to you for having a teenager's blood pressure. You're definitely doing something right there in your lifestyle.
Yeah.
I think all of us would love to have blood pressures in that range.
Well, what they're thinking though is maybe with the question is when you're checking your blood pressure to monitor it, whether you're on medication or not, you want to generally rest for about 10 minutes. The reason it's because that's going to potentially be lower than it would be if you just were walking up a flight of stairs and then sit down and check it right away. But what's maybe more important than resting or doing it right after you go up a flight of stairs is that you do it consistently the same way every time, so you can kind of check the pattern of your blood pressure over time. So if you normally rest for about 10 minutes, in this, first thing in the morning or whatever, and you check your blood pressure and you're tracking it over time, you want to make sure you do that every time so that you can kind of pick a trend, because people will go nuts when they check it. Sometimes when they've rested, sometimes after they've exercised, sometimes after they've eaten, all different times of the day. It goes up and down, and it drives people nuts. So you have to, kind of pick a time to be consistent and check it under those same conditions every time to kind of get an idea what your blood pressure is doing over time.
I have a
Is
question.
Go,
it
Alice,
a good-
and then Pam.
Well, so I see all these ladies mostly ladies who drink a lot of free water and their salt is all low and they might be on a little bit of a diuretic, water pill, and they're low salt. And so I'm like conflicted about telling people to eat low salt. And I know processed food is very high in salt, but and Scott, this is more to you, like me personally, I exercise a lot, I sweat a lot, and I tend to run low blood pressure, and I crave salt, and I might be a little bit of a salt waster. So salt waster is like, let's say you wear a black t-shirt and it's hot and you sweat, and if you leave like you get a white crystals on your shirt, that means that you tend to lose a lot of salt in your sweat. It's kind of a genetic thing. I don't know, thoughts on that. All ladies who drink tons of free water and get low sodium might be on a diuretic or water pill, and then folks who are more athletic, run low blood pressure, and need that salt to kind of drive the pressure up.
Scott, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, there was always unique situations where you have to monitor the blood sodium and people that drink too much water and stuff. But I think for 90% of people that come to class and they're eating a more standard American diet, they're getting 70 to 80% of their sodium intake, their salt intake, from processed foods. And so just by knocking out the processed foods, and you're going to be right down where you want to be in that 1,500 to 2,000 milligrams a day recommended dietary allowance. And also from the American College of Cardiology, American Heart Association, that's where they're wanting us to get down to. So I think that's, as far as lowering your salt intake, I usually equate that to patients with just knocking out the processed foods, lots of breads and canned soups and hot dogs and processed meat, other processed meats and packaged crackers, cookies, all those kinds of things. That's where most of the salt intake comes from.
Alice, stick around for a couple more videos. We're going to get to it pretty soon about that salt issue some more. Let's talk about fruit and vegetables. How much fruit and vegetable for increased potassium to lower blood pressure? Anybody? Is it 1 serving of each? No, it's a little more. It would be probably an ideal range would be something like Dr. Greger is recommending, about 9 servings of fruit and vegetables a day. That's about 4 servings of fruit, 5 servings of vegetables at a minimum. And if you want to do a little bit more than that, that would be really helpful potentially. What would Dr. Esselstyn have to say? Anybody familiar with what he advises his end-stage heart patients to do? Have you read How to Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease? And he took these end-stage heart patients and actually unclogged their arteries. What would he recommend in terms of lowering your blood pressure? And it has to do with something you eat. And it happens.
Lots of leafy vegetables.
Yeah, green leafy, dark
Green.
green leafy vegetables. And how many times a day is he recommending that people eat those?
5.
6 times a day.
Oh, 6 times a day.
6 times a day, which I don't know, that's an awful lot, it seems like. But what the reason is that to keep your arteries unclogged, to keep them smooth and not allow the plaque buildup, and to lower your blood pressure, because the nitric oxide is produced and that dilates your arteries and lowers your blood pressure. So that's one food he'd recommend. But that's part of the fruit and veggie topic. Now, fatty foods. Are any of you surprised that fatty foods thicken your blood, make it more viscous, more thick? The thicker your blood, the higher your blood pressure is going to rise. So you may want to choose to avoid the fatty foods. And so that means, where do you get your fat? You get your fat in the food, but which foods? The animal products, the meat, the dairy, the eggs, the yogurt, the cheese, particularly. You're getting a lots of fat in those. And so be super careful if you want to control your blood pressure. Weight loss is important, but there's a lot of people who are overweight and their blood pressure, they're told, is normal and they think everything's fine. But by and large, the overweight leads to higher blood pressures on the average. Exercise has been shown to lower blood pressure. The DASH diet, lower sodium, more fruit and vegetables, has been shown to lower blood pressure as much as most of the early drugs, high blood pressure drugs, which just treat the symptoms, not the cause. And then there's meditation. What about meditation? It's also been shown to lower blood pressure. There are so many things that you can do to lower your blood pressure if you're having difficulty. And you just need a coach to help counsel you through that sometimes. Sometimes you can do it on your own, and kudos to you if you can. But if you can't, then just get in touch with someone who's going to help you on your journey. Be a coach. If you want to learn to play tennis or play the piano, get a coach or a teacher who actually does that, knows how to do it to help you on your journey. That's my recommendation. Okay, Pam, you're unmuted, and then Marcia.
What about people who have systolic numbers in the 90s?
You mean the systolic in the 90 range?
Yes.
Yeah, so if they're asymptomatic and they are otherwise in the 90 range, they're not taking any blood pressure medicine, and that's their normal for them. My wife's is somewhere around 96 systolic. So that's been her normal for years, and she's 74, going to be 75 soon. You know, it just depends on your circumstance. I wouldn't say just because you have a number in the 90s, it's horrible, but if you're taking blood pressure medicine, you may want to cut back on that blood pressure medicine because there may be an increased risk of strokes with that. Too low.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Who's next? Marcia and then Joe. Unless Marcia didn't need to go.
I just got through riding my bike, and just for curiosity, I took my blood pressure. It was 144/76. Usually it's 120 or lower.
All right,
Could
so
that be because I
riding your
didn't?
bike raises your blood pressure a little bit. It sounds like it's fine. If your blood pressure, we're not riding the bike, is in the 120s, you're good. Joe, unmute yourself.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have, sorry, excuse me. Do you have an opinion about the blood pressure medication lisinopril?
Opinion about everything, but aside from that.
Well, I mean, or let me rephrase the question then. Do you have any knowledge about whether lisinopril taken over a long period of time has otherwise negative effects?
The only effects that I understand, you're supposed to take it to protect your kidneys, but some people have decreased kidney function with long-term lisinopril use. You know, it's treating a number, it's treating a symptom. It's not really treating the root cause of why you're taking that medicine. And so I'd much encourage you to do lifestyle choices. Unless you are not able to control it that way, then maybe you need to take the lisinopril, and then the benefits probably outweigh the risks.
Okay, well, my second question is a little more complex. To open it up, does the name Dr. Kyle Homerkin mean anything to either of you guys?
He's a doctor here in Oregon, I think.
That's correct.
Yeah, I've heard the name, and I think I've met him.
Well, the reason why I was asking you that question is that I went to him when he was part of a practice of a clinic up in the rather small area of Monroe.
Yes.
And he was actually run out of that clinic, told to leave, because that particular clinic is right next to a school. And Dr. Homerkin was faulted for not prescribing enough vaccines or prescriptions for school children. But before that happened, I was a patient of him, and I had high blood pressure, and he loaned me a book about the heart and high blood pressure. Unfortunately, I don't remember the name of that book. But what I do have, and this dates back around 2016, when I was first diagnosed with high blood pressure. And there were some supplements recommended by that book, by the author of that book, to treat high blood pressure and heart health specifically. And I have them in front of me.
Joe, no supplements. Do these other things. You're going to get people who are going to tell you to take supplements, but forget it. That's the message you're going to hear from us over and over again. And I know that we're in a society where we want to hear that it's a supplement that's going to bring us our health, but they are not regulated. They sometimes have toxic contaminants in them. And I would not trust a resource that's promoting supplements to treat high blood pressure. I would trust Dr. Michael Greger. I would trust Dr. Bernard. I would trust Dr. McDougall. I would not trust these other doctors recommending supplements. So,
well, I mean, this alternative doctor, Homerkin, loaned me his personal book. I don't know the name of the book or the author, but I began taking those. And when I was first diagnosed with the high blood pressure, they wanted me to take statins, which I adamantly refused. So instead of statins, I was taking red yeast rice extract and enzyme CoQ10, or a better form, ubiquinol. But I heard that a long-term usage of even the supplement I mentioned a minute ago, red yeast rice, could have negative long-term effects. Now, that's a food supplement. But
okay, we're going to have to take this up because we've gone over this a couple times in class, and I want to keep going on for some videos. We'll talk with you privately about this. And but I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I would be interested to get the name of these doctors who you're recommending, because
okay.
I'll
we'll get to the list. We'll get to the list. Go ahead.
All right, we'll let somebody else jump in. Go ahead.
Doug. Unmute.
Okay. I was told I needed to have 1,200 milligrams a day of calcium for osteoporosis, and I was taking some calcium supplements, and then I read that it can have bad consequences, and they say you should get your calcium from food, and I drink some soy milk and has tricalcium phosphate added to it. So is that essentially just a supplement? That's not a natural thing?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Correct. Okay, we're going to get on to the next video, and then we'll get back to some more questions. The evidence that salt raises blood pressure. Getting back to Alice's question about salt, and we've got a couple.
Like any group with vested interests, the food industry resists regulation. Faced with a growing scientific consensus that salt increases blood pressure, major food manufacturers have adopted desperate measures to try to stop governments from recommending salt reduction. Rather than reformulate their products and save lives, manufacturers have lobbied governments, refused to cooperate, encouraged misinformation campaigns, and tried to discredit the evidence. After all, salt is the main source of flavor in processed foods. Of course, they could improve the flavor by adding real ingredients, but like making a Pop-Tart with actual strawberries would be more expensive, cut into profits. The evidence that they're trying to discredit includes double-blind, randomized trials dating back decades. You take people with high blood pressure, put them on a sodium-restricted diet, and their blood pressure drops. Then if you keep them on a low-salt diet and add a placebo, nothing happens. But if you instead give them salt in the form of a time-release sodium pill secretly, their blood pressure goes back up. And the more sodium you secretly slip them, the higher their blood pressure climbs. Even just a single meal can do it. If you take people with normal blood pressure, give them a bowl of soup containing the amount of salt a regular meal might contain, and your blood pressure goes up over the next 3 hours compared to the same soup with no added salt. Why, though? High blood pressure appears to be our body's way to push out excess salt out of our system. Dozens of such studies have been done, showing that if we reduce our salt intake, we can reduce our blood pressure, and the greater the reduction, the greater the benefit. The so-called DASH diet, which I've covered before, commonly used to capture the blood pressure benefits of a more plant-based diet. But how do we know the benefits had anything to do with eating less salt instead of just eating more fruits and vegetables? Because it was put to the test. Sure, eating healthier lowers blood pressure no matter how much salt we eat, but even if we stick to the same diet, lowering salt helps independently of other dietary improvements. You can do this on a community level. You take two matched villages that both start out about the same. In the control village, on average, blood pressures went up or stayed the same. But in the village where they were able to cut down on salt intake, blood pressures went down. Whereas if we don't cut down, a chronic high salt intake can lead to a gradual increase in blood pressure throughout life, as shown in the famous InterSalt study. 52 centers from 32 countries participated with hundreds of participants each, and 4 of those centers were in populations that ate so little salt they actually complied with the American Heart Association guidelines for salt reduction. Something less than 1% of Americans achieve. In a population where everyone makes the cutoff, not a single case of high blood pressure was found, not one case of high blood pressure. But not only that, the older folks had the same blood pressure as the teenagers. This is why including such populations is so important. If you just look at the 48 centers in the industrialized Western world, there does not appear to be any relationship between rising blood pressure with age and how much sodium people are getting every day, right? It just looks like a random assortment of dots. Now, the salt industry looks at this and says, aha! See, I told you so. No relationship between salt and increasing blood pressures as you get older. But maybe that's because they're all getting too much salt. The American Heart Association recommendation is that everyone get their salt intakes under here. So they're all way over. You can imagine a similar result if this was instead lung cancer rates versus packs of cigarettes smoked every year. Whether you smoked 150 packs a year or 200 packs a year, it might not make much of a difference. To see a relationship between smoking and cancer, you'd have to compare smokers to those who rarely light up. And indeed, if you add in those low-salt populations that get little or no high blood pressure as they get older, and you end up with a highly statistically significant relationship between increasing sodium and increasing blood pressure. but only if you include people that actually comply with the SALT guidelines. As with so many lifestyle interventions, they only work if you actually do it.
Now, I'm going to play high blood pressure, maybe a choice in a moment, but I want to come back to Alice. Your question was not necessarily, does sodium, you weren't, I don't believe, arguing that lowering people's sodium is going to hurt them. It will probably help their blood pressure, but there is a group of people who seem to may need to have some salt. You look at the Yanomamo Indians, none of them have high blood pressure. They've been doing this from the time they're kids. So the question is what should we be focusing our attention on? Should we be teaching our kids and our families to avoid salt? Or should we equivocate, be on the fence? Well, it might help some, it might not help others. That's the question I have for you. And you're going to come to a conclusion over time what you think is best. I don't want an answer tonight. I don't want to put you on the spot. I'm just, trying to play a little bit, have fun.
Someone else had a question in there about caffeine, and caffeine will raise blood pressure as well. And so that's good. If you're having high blood pressure and you're on medication, be better to switch to decaf if you're drinking caffeinated coffee. And one thing I wanted to mention from earlier, we had a lot of questions, is in my experience the last 11, almost 12 years doing this, is getting people off blood pressure medicine has been the most common thing that I've done. I've dozens and dozens and dozens of patients over time that really the whole food plant-based diet really responds to, and I can get many of the patients off of their blood pressure medication because you're treating the cause, and it really responds well to that. And so that's really important. And then the other thing, I don't know if Charlie's going to show another video about it, but the DASH diet, how it came to be was they studied what dietary factors would lower the blood pressure the most, and what they came up with in this committee was 100% whole food plant-based diet would lower the blood pressure the most. But they decided, well, that's too strict, people aren't going to follow that. So then they said, what can we add back in to the DASH diet to make it more tolerable for more people? And so then they said, okay, let's add in some chicken, some fish, some low-fat dairy, and then people will be more likely to do it. So they didn't allow for those foods because they figured it would lower blood pressure even more. It's just that it's a concession. And so that's why we just teach the science and that, and what's going to give you the best results, and then let you decide what you want to eat and how many changes you want to make.
I was really blown away by the Yanomamo study with no cases of high blood pressure at all. I mean, that's pretty amazing. Susan.
Could you go over a little bit about what are the side effects that people get if they do take the statins? I'm trying to tell my brother that he maybe should cut out the statins and, eat better. I told him, and he said he doesn't have any side effects. So what do you have to say about side effects?
Well, if he's going to continue to eat the standard American diet, then he probably should be taking the statin. That's my first thought. If he's going to change his diet, then he has an option to get off and avoid some of the side effects. For me, it was diarrhea.
Yeah.
No matter which statin I took, I had diarrhea, and it didn't make a difference with the dose. Some people, it's muscle aches. Some people, it might be liver injury, not very many, but some. I don't know. There may be others, Scott or Alice, you may have had side effects from statins, from other things, but it's not, I wouldn't tell someone don't take a statin because there's side effects if they are going to continue the standard American diet.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. In his case, he's cutting down on meat quite a bit, he said. But yeah. Okay. Yeah. I just was wondering, what was that second thing that you said can be a side effect? You said
like muscle aches and
Oh, muscle aches and pain. Okay, all right,
maybe
good.
some liver injury. It's all listed under, do a Google search, side effects.
Okay. Oh, yeah, good idea. Thanks.
And another thing to remember about statins is even though we recommend statins, the number needed to treat if you've not had a heart attack or stroke is one person out of 104 people gets benefit after taking this medicine for 5 years. So over a 5-year period, one person in 104 gets a benefit. But the other 103 are putting themselves at risk for having the side effects. So each person should have the ability to make a decision on their own. Is this a risk that I want to take? Is this going to really bring me benefit? If they've had a heart attack or stroke in the past, they definitely are going to have much better benefit than that. And that's why it's always recommended for those people. But for those who haven't had a heart attack or stroke as yet, the odds are not that great. It would be much better to change their lifestyle. Yes, Lynn.
I resisted statins. My doctor wanted to do it I just kept resisting. And then with my heart attack this week, I was put on atorvastatin, kind of a high dose. And I resisted it because in the past I had muscle aches and junk. And so I've had an MI. There was a 99% occluded RCA, but everything else looks good. I'm wondering, a nurse suggested, I refused it the first night and in the hospital. A nurse suggested that I use it as a bridge while my stent's settling, and that maybe that I could stop it in a couple weeks. Now I've had diarrhea and some muscle aches like I had before, and I noticed my liver enzymes were a little raised in the last lab draw at the hospital. So I would like to go off them, but it's like, what's the time period for that? I was assuming that true liver injury couldn't happen within a couple weeks, and I thought I'll wait till I get a cardiologist and make a decision then. So if you have any comment.
I have a question, which is, what were your numbers on your cholesterol? Like, do you know what your numbers were?
My numbers were high previously just in Eugene, but I noticed at least the first lab draw in Eugene, the cholesterol was normal. Or it was, it was maybe, it was like, if it wasn't normal, it was like just right there, it was, so it wasn't exceedingly high.
Being under 200 total, and then LDL, what's your LDL for?
It was 204, and my LDL is a little high, but not terribly high. My HDL has always been pretty low, but it was actually higher in the hospital. It was up to like 45, which is higher for me. LDL, I can't remember the number. I think it might have been under 200, but not much.
So
or no, maybe 150. No, that was, yeah, I was thinking total cholesterol. So like maybe 150-ish.
There's this thing called Lp(a), which seems to be genetic and seems to be a predictor for like more severe heart disease. The cardiologists do it. I generally don't order it, but since you did have a heart attack, if your Lp(a) was high, like maybe your cardiologist would get that. I think I'd take a statin for a while till you really get the plant-based diet thing down. Like, I mean, since you've had a heart attack, like that's what I would recommend. That's a little more mainstream. Charlie and Scott might have a different idea.
But the risk of liver injury isn't going to be great to be on it for just like 2 to 3 weeks or something, is what I'm thinking.
I'd probably go longer than that. What did they put you on, and what dose?
Atorvastatin, either 80 or 90, can't remember. It was the higher one.
That's a pretty high dose.
Yes, it is.
Really high dose. I mean, atorvastatin, like there probably is some anti-inflammatory effect on any dose of statin, like even a low, like, 10, 20, there probably is some thing we're not measuring. But I mean, if your liver enzymes are going up, you could probably cut down on the dose. But if you just had a heart attack, when did this happen?
Wednesday.
Oh, you look darn good.
It was only my RCA, and the guy says minimal heart damage, other vessels are great, so I'm good. But I'm sleeping a lot. I'm a little tired. I'm adjusting.
And the thing that's really,
Mm,
the thing that's really important that your cardiologist probably isn't going to tell you is that, the stent you just had put in, yeah, that protected your heart muscle that was being blocked at that time, but but having that stent does not reduce your risk of having another heart attack, not at all, zero. And so you want to make sure that you do the whole food plant-based diet 100%. I would really recommend that, and all the other lifestyle things. And the statin, I'll give you the numbers for what we call secondary prevention, which what that means is we know you already have heart disease. And so if 1,000 patients take a statin for 5 years, you prevent 100 patients from having a heart attack. So that's about 10%. So 1,000 patients take it for 5 years, you prevent 100 heart attacks when you've already had a heart attack. So I agree with Alice. I think I would take the statin probably at least, maybe even for 6 months to a year, probably, just because it does, like Alice is saying, it does other things besides lower cholesterol. It helps stabilize the plaque a little bit. So it's definitely a different conversation when you have heart disease than when you're just trying to prevent the first time. But I think the other thing I wanted to mention is they say, oh, the rest of your arteries looked okay. Well, that don't take any solace in that, because 90% of all heart attacks occur with blockages that don't really show up on an angiogram. You may be 20 or 30% blocked, and you basically have a plaque that ruptures, and then that creates so that's probably what happened. There's a 90% chance the way you had a heart attack was you had just a small plaque, and it ruptured, and it created a blood clot, and that blocked off the artery totally, because you had EKG changes, probably you had some ST elevation, and and what that tells us is that you had a plaque that was probably not it wasn't causing any symptoms. It was maybe 30 or 40% blocked. It takes usually about 75% blockage to actually start to get chest pain over time when you get angina.
Never
chest
got
pain.
chest pain.
Right. So it tells me you probably had a 30% blockage, and it ruptured, and it created a clot, which is what caused the ST elevation. You had to get the stent in there to unblock it, and that did save your heart. So that's really important. But the rest of your arteries are likely not clean, because you have plaque, and so you have other plaques in your artery, in your heart, or even in your brain, that could rupture at any point and cause another heart attack or a stroke. And so that's why you want to probably take the statin, but 100% plant-based diet, do all the lifestyle things, and don't take any solace in the fact that they said, oh, the rest of your arteries looked okay, because that's probably not true.
Okay.
Make
Okay,
sure you
it's
get
just the side effects. If they get horrible, it's going to be a choice.
Yeah.
And let me read you the numbers on the side effects. So I have it right here. So the 100 patients had their heart attack prevented out of 1,000 for 5 years. There's 5 to 10 excess cases of diabetes from the statin out of that 1,000. So that's not very many. There's only a half a case per 1,000 of the muscle pain, and a half a case of 1,000 for having hemorrhaging in the brain. No increased risk of cancer, no increased risk of dementia, and no increased risk of kidney disease. So that's the latest update on 1,000 people taking a statin for 5 years. So
do you have liver data? Any data on the liver?
It doesn't list it here, but that that is potential, but it's usually just a transient elevation in the liver enzymes. It doesn't necessarily cause liver damage. It's just something. If you did have elevated liver enzymes on a blood test, they would just probably lower your dose and see what happens. But I wouldn't be too worried about that. There is some other those risks are still there, but again, when you look at 100 people having a heart attack prevented versus 5 to 10 excess cases of diabetes and a half a case of muscle pain, I would say the benefits outweigh the risks at this point. That's my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. The other thing is sometimes for the muscle aches, adding CoQ10, I know no supplements, but sometimes CoQ10 can really help reduce that. And
I was always taking CoQ10 and the cardiologist said to continue it, just 100 milligrams, but I take it in the morning.
yeah, did he say why he was starting you so high? All right, what was your prior cholesterol? Like you said, sometimes during a heart attack, cholesterol, like during that acute phase, cholesterol drops, like it drops for a short period of time. What was your cholesterol before the heart attack?
I can't remember, but it was always high.
Okay. And high triglycerides too, or?
Triglycerides went back and forth because even though I sort of slid a little on the whole plant food thing, I don't like meat and I don't like beef and I got off most dairy. So triglycerides have been like fairly normal.
Okay.
Did you get the book Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease by Esselstyn? If you haven't, you should get it. You should read it if you don't want another heart attack.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Edward?
Have you heard of liquid aminos?
Yeah, it's really high. It's used in cooking. It's really high in salt.
Okay. My mom brought me a meal and she used a lot of liquid aminos because it said it nowhere on it does it say it has a ton of salt.
Yeah, it does. I mean, coconut aminos have a little bit less. So when a recipe calls for liquid aminos, you could use coconut aminos, and it has a little bit less sodium in it. You just have to look at the label.
Okay. I gotta ask her not to do that then.
Yeah, ask her not to. Joe, you have a quick question or a comment? Unmute yourself. You're not unmuted yet. You're still not unmuted.
I'm working with a tablet. We don't have a good relationship. I've had this tablet for years, and it's a very unhappy marriage. I don't do well with the touch screen. The book, Charlie, that you were holding up about reversing and preventing heart attacks, I'm pretty sure that is the book that was lent to me by Kyle Homerkin that I've read. I'm pretty sure that is the book that has very specific supplements that they recommend for heart health and circulation. I'm not absolutely positive, but I'm pretty sure.
Whatever they recommend, I'm good with. That's what I've been following for 12 years. So whatever he
yeah. I originally wanted to respond to the comment about inflammation. The woman was talking about inflammation. My experience with inflammation is if you want to cut down on inflammation, get curcumin. And get it as a supplement rather than just take the raw powder. Is that with my knowledge, and I'm not a professional, but my knowledge about curcumin is the big problem with absorbability. Turmeric,
Joe,
hard to absorb.
I will agree with you. Curcumin is good. So does Dr. Greger agree. Quarter teaspoon a day for everybody is probably a healthy choice. And we're going to go to the next video now.
Okay.
Thank you. Next video, high blood pressure may be a choice.
For the first 90% of our evolution, we ate diets containing less than a quarter teaspoon of salt a day, because for the first 90% of our evolution, we ate mostly plants. We went millions of years without salt shakers, and so our bodies evolved into salt-conserving machines, which served us well until we discovered salt could be used to preserve foods. Without refrigeration, this is a big boon to human civilization. Of course, this may have led to a general rise in blood pressure, but who cares if the alternative is starving to death because all your food rotted away? But where does that leave us now, when we no longer have to live off pickles and jerky? We are genetically programmed to eat 10 times less salt than we do now. Even many low-salt diets can be considered high-salt diets. That's why it's critical to understand what the concept of normal is when it comes to salt. Having a normal salt intake can lead to a normal blood pressure, which can help us die from all the normal causes, like heart attacks and strokes. And doctors used to be taught that a normal systolic blood pressure is approximately 100 plus H. Systolic blood pressure means the top number. And indeed, that's about what we're born with. Babies start out with a blood pressure around like 95 over 60, but then as we age, that 95 can go to 120 by our 20s, then 140 by our 40s, the official cutoff for high blood pressure, and keep climbing as we age. That was considered normal, since everyone's blood pressure creeps up as we get older, and if that's normal, then heart attacks and strokes are normal too, since risk starts rising once we start getting above the 100 we had as a baby. But if blood pressures over 100 are associated with disease, maybe they should be considered abnormal, perhaps caused by our abnormally high salt intake, 10 times more than what our bodies were designed to handle. Maybe if we just ate a natural amount of salt, our blood pressures naturally would not go up with age, and we'd be protected. Of course, to test that theory, you'd have to find a population in modern times that doesn't use salt or eat processed food or go out to eat. For that, you'd have to go deep into the Amazon rainforest. Meet the Yanomamo people, a no-salt culture. Lowest salt intake ever reported, which is to say normal for our species salt intake. And so what happens to their blood pressure? They start out with a blood pressure of about 100 over 60 and end up with a blood pressure of about 100 over 60. Though theirs is described as a salt-deficient diet, that's like saying they have a diet deficient in Twinkies. They're the ones, it seems, eating normal salt intakes, apparently leading to truly normal blood pressures. Those in their 50s having the blood pressure of a 20-year-old. The percentage of the population tested that had high blood pressure? 0. Whereas elsewhere in Brazil, up to 38% of the population may be affected. The Yanomamos probably represent the ultimate human example of the importance of salt on blood pressure. But look, it could have been other factors. They didn't drink alcohol, ate a high-fiber plant-based diet, lots of exercise, no obesity. There's a number of plant-based populations eating little salt that experience no rise in blood pressure as they age. So, how do you know what exactly is to blame? And ideally, we do an interventional trial. Imagine if you took people literally dying from out-of-control high blood pressure, so-called malignant hypertension, where you go blind from bleeding into your eyes, your kidneys shut down, your heart fails, and then you withhold from those people blood pressure medication, so their fate is certain death, and then you put them on a Yanomamo level of salt intake, a normal for human species salt intake. And if instead of dying they walked away cured of their hypertension, that would pretty much seal the deal. Enter Dr. Walter Kempner and his rice and fruit diet. Patients coming in with blood pressures of 210 over 140, dropping down to 80 over 60. Now, the reason he could ethically withhold all modern blood pressure medications and treat with diet alone? The drugs hadn't been invented yet. This was back in the 1940s. Now, the diet wasn't just extremely low salt, but strictly plant-based, extremely low-fat protein calories, but there's no doubt that Kempner's rice diet achieved remarkable results, and Kempner is now remembered as the person who demonstrated beyond any shadow of a doubt that high blood pressure can often be lowered with a low enough salt diet. 40 years ago, it was acknowledged that the evidence is very good, if not conclusive, that a low enough reduction of salt in the diet would result in the prevention of essential hypertension, that rising of blood pressure as we age, and its disappearance is a major public health problem. It looks like we knew how to stop this 4 decades ago. In that time, how many people have died? Today, high blood pressure may wipe out 400,000 Americans every year, 1,000 unnecessary deaths every day.
Kempner's diet. Let's see. I guess we'll have to do it next week. Or I could actually do it this week. Kempner rice diet whipping us into shape. I want to play this, and then we'll see if we have a question or two.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt brought us through the Great Depression and World War II. Who knows how history would have been different had he not died in his 4th term as president from a massive stroke. In the following days and months, we learned that Roosevelt had suffered from severe high blood pressure for years. In spite of this, he was on no medications or other treatments. The reason for the lack of treatment is stark and simple. There were none. The state of the art at the time was death. Death from so-called malignant hypertension, out-of-control high blood pressure, for which it was thought there was no remedy. But they were wrong. There was Walter Kempner and his rice fruit diet. Physician scientists trained with the best fled Nazi Germany and set up shop at Duke. We began treating malignant hypertension patients with a radical diet consisting of only white rice and fruit, with strikingly favorable results. A rapid reduction in blood pressure, rapid improvement in kidney failure, eye pressure, heart failure, and other manifestations of this previously fatal illness. He figured that if a low-salt diet helped with blood pressure, a low-protein diet helped with kidney function, and a low-fat and cholesterol diet helped the heart, why not take it to its logical conclusion and design a no-salt, no-cholesterol diet of almost pure carbohydrate? So he designed a diet with less sodium than any low-sodium diet, less protein than any low-protein diet, and less cholesterol and fat than any other low-fat diet. His hope was that it would just stop the progression of the disease. Instead, something miraculous happened. In about 2/3 of cases, the disease reversed. Reversal of heart failure, reversal of eye damage, reversal of kidney failure. Remember, this was effectively a terminal disease. People just had a few months to live, but if they went on the diet, most got better. Before and after. The round pictures at the bottom are photographs taken of the back of people's eyes, starting out swollen, bloody, and leaking, and then nearly normal in a matter of months. Kidney disease cured. A striking fact is that in some patients, after being effectively cured by the diet over many months, they could then relax the diet to a more conventional plant-based diet and go on and live a normal, active life. The rice diet may actually drop blood pressures too low, so you have to modify it, add back other foods to bring the pressures back up to normal. An editorial in the New England Journal of Medicine described Kempner's results as little short of miraculous. Practically speaking, there's probably no more effective diet for obese, decompensated cardiac patients. The problem, though, is that most physicians lack the extraordinary persuasive powers required to keep the patient eating such a restricted diet. When Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn presented his study results demonstrating in some cases a reversal of near end-stage heart disease with a whole-food plant-based diet, the chair of Cleveland Clinic's cardiology department asked, how can we expect patients to stay on a strict diet like this when we can't even get them to quit smoking? Just like penicillin drugs don't work at all unless you take them, plant-based diets don't work unless you actually eat them. I think the answer is that the physician must have a zealous belief in the diet and must convey that passion to the patients. For Kempner, to keep his patients on the rice diet, Kempner browbeat, yelled at, and castigated them when he caught them straying. And he didn't just browbeat them, he sometimes actually beat them. It came out in a lawsuit in which a former patient sued Dr. Kempner that he had literally whipped her with a whip and other patients to motivate them to stick to the diet. Reminds me of the famous diabetes physician Arnoldo Cantini back in the 1800s, who knew that the remedy for diabetes is not at the drugstore but in the kitchen. To ensure compliance, if necessary, he would lock a patient up for 6 weeks. Thankfully, in terms of personality, Dr. Esselstyn is the opposite of Dr. Kempner, polite, soft-spoken, gentle, able to keep his patients on track without whipping them. And last but not least, Esselstyn walks the talk, following the diet himself, whereas Kempner died of a heart attack, though at the age of 94. His work continues on in Durham, where they continue a relaxed version of the diet, allowing actual vegetables. A year before Roosevelt died, Kempner had already published his miraculous results. It seems highly likely that, had the rice diet been provided to President Roosevelt a year before his death, his disease might have been controlled before his fatal stroke, and that this fatal event could have been averted.
A little history is always kind of fun. And listening to Kempner's story has always fascinated me. Whipping his patients into shape is not something that I would partake of. I like Esselstyn's approach the best.
He gives them Esselstyn gives his patients his time and attention and care. That's what his secret is.
And he saw his patients every 2 weeks for 5 solid years, people who had end-stage heart disease, to help them stay on track. Every 2 weeks, he would see them. Pretty amazing. Any questions before we take off? Until next week, we're going to do another session that's open forum where we'll answer your questions, but maybe I have a few videos to show you too. Yolanda.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I was just wondering, I'm sort of like Alice in that I'm a heavy sweater, a salty sweater, and I often crave salt. And I'm thinking, am I craving the taste of salt, or is my body telling me you need salt? I'm not sure. I mean, I know that I've had some horrific cramps after long backpacking and a lot of sweating. And I did some research and I determined that it probably was due to low sodium, because I was well hydrated, drinking, water, filtered stream water and that sort of thing. But man, one night it was so intense, I couldn't believe it.
Well,
Anyway.
salt is a physiologic craving. So when we are low, we do crave it. So I guess I would associate it with when it's occurring. If it's occurring after you sweat, had a heavy sweating day, exercising, or a hot day, then I would, go ahead and have, some bread or something like that that's going to have some salt in it. You wouldn't want to do too much, but if it's happening like when you're hungry and you're feeling kind of stressed and things like that, salt, sugar, and fat can equally cause cravings in that sense, when just to flood the dopamine. But if it's always after heavy sweating, exercise, and stuff like that, there's probably something to it.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yolanda, quick question. What's your blood pressure? Do you run low?
I don't know what it is now. I haven't had it taken since I've changed so much of my diet. It's not high. It's always been in the normal range. It could be lower now. I'm not sure. I don't know.
Anybody else? Okay. It's been fun as usual. Hope we've, answered a few questions. There's always some unknowns, and, there are decisions that we kind of have to make based upon the best evidence we have. So hopefully some of the resources can help you make decisions as you move on your journey toward health. And next week, we'll talk a bit more on high blood pressure and bring some more of your questions.
I remember it'll be a different link, Zoom link next week. So check the website, the class newsletter. To make sure you click the right link for next week.
What's the link changing? curious.
Yeah, there's a link changing. So the link, look at the latest newsletter coming up next week for the new Zoom link. It'll work the same. It's just I'm not going to be with the med school, so I had to change the Zoom from the school to my own personal.
Gotcha. Okay.
And if there's a password request, it's the letter or the number 1 if they ask for a password. I don't think it will, but it might.
Scott, I have a question for you.
Mhm.
And Charlie too, but I thought you might know. Effects of exercise on glucose.
It lowers it.
Yeah.
So
Lowers.
especially if you're high, so it lowers insulin resistance. So exercising muscle, it doesn't take as much insulin to allow sugar to go inside the muscle cell when you have exercising muscle, because the mitochondria are so basically so amplified, and so the sugar comes in much easier. So of course, if you don't eat enough and you don't have high blood sugar, then it could lower it a bit too. But so especially someone that has like type 1 diabetes or insulin dependent type 2, they can lower their blood sugar too much and they have to eat something. But it's good. Exercise is good at lowering blood sugar.
Okay, what about maybe the post-exercise rebound?
Well, I mean, if you're somebody that has insulin resistance pretty bad, or you have diabetes, then sometimes the catecholamine release. So if you're exercising really intensely, sometimes the adrenaline release from the physical effort can cause you to spike a blood sugar a little bit sometimes. But in general, just for overall, it lowers your blood sugar in a healthy way. But there are times where it can spike it if you do something really intense. So you just have to, but it's, people that have normal blood sugar that don't have insulin resistance or diabetes, it doesn't tend to fluctuate one way or the other dramatically.
So, what's your goal of sugar during endurance exercise, or what should it be?
Well, you should, be eating carbohydrate prior to, and then depending on how long you're exercising, you might need to do it during. So, because you want to keep your glycogen stores full, so you can draw from your glycogen stores to complete an endurance event. But if just the general exerciser is exercising for 20 to 30 minutes, you don't need a lot of carbohydrate loading or calories or anything like that, just to do a small exercise. But if you're running like a half marathon or riding your bike for 3 hours, then you kind of need to make sure your glycogen stores are full. You do a little bit of the carbohydrate loading prior to that, so you have plenty of fuel, because you're going to be burning mostly all sugar during that period of time.
Well, the rep gave me a CGM, one of those glucose monitors. So just for fun. And
oh yeah.
And so I went for a bike ride, an intense bike ride, and I kept dropping below 70. Like as I'm riding, the little, it's going dee 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 dee, and I'm like, and I'm asymptomatic, like completely asymptomatic. And then my liver must have squirted out some more glucose, and it would be better. I didn't stop to check, and then it would go off again, and it went off like several times.
Like how low did it get? Did it get below 60 or just below 70?
Probably, I didn't stop.
Because even in the 60s is normal. I mean, that's fine.
Yeah.
Usually people get symptomatic if they get below 60, but most people do.
Symptomatic, but I was really surprised. I felt fine. Like, and I'm just like, oh man, is this normal? Like, I don't know. I mean, it's really interesting. If you can get the rep to give you one and try it, I would recommend it. It's like fascinating.
Interesting. Doug.
My wife leads several Zoom classes, and I assume the free Zoom is limited to 45 minutes.
Yeah, we're paying $16 a month for the 100 people. And for an unlimited time. Go ahead, Alice.
Well, so I have a morning latte. That spikes me to 120. It spikes my sugar to 120 for a short time, which really surprised me as well.
Not a horrible.
That's pretty normal.
Not a horrible spike at
Well,
120.
it's not going above 180. If you're above 180, then that would be good. But
Right.
anything between like 70 and 150, 160 is okay when it's not fasting. Sometimes those numbers can scare people, confuse people. So it just depends on what you're going to do with the information. It can sometimes just be a distractor.
It's a fun distractor. I'm having it's really fun.
Keep having fun with it, Alice. We'll be interested to hear about more stories on your bike rides. Okay, everybody, I gotta record this and we'll see you all next week, perhaps. New Zoom.
All right.
Thanks, Scott.
Good night. All right. Good night, everybody.